Thank you. I'm Louise Hamlin, a professor in the studio art department, and I'm honored to introduce our guest this afternoon. But before we start, could you please make sure your computers and cell phones are turned off? You won't need to take notes because, as you can see in the back, we're filming this talk. So if you want to see it again, you can come to the exhibition office and get the tape and see it as many times as you like. That said, welcome to the first studio art lecture of this academic year. It'll be a really good one today, as our speaker is the remarkable artist Ambreen Butt. She's also our artist in residence. For those of you who don't know what that is, the Studio Art Department has had a long and extremely honorable tradition of artists in residence, beginning with Orozco. People who live, we give them a studio, an apartment, and the opportunity to work fairly uninterruptedly throughout the whole term. We only ask of them that they be available to talk to students who want to speak to them about their work, about the artist's work, about anything else. And so if you'd like to speak to Ambreen at some point during the term, please make an appointment in the exhibitions office, and she'll be glad to talk to you. It's really a remarkable opportunity to speak to artists that you will see in museums for the rest of your lives. You see their work anyway, not them. And then I encourage everybody to take a really, really close look at her show, which opens this afternoon. Right after this talk, we're having a reception in the Jaffe Friede Gallery, which is up in the Hopkins Center. There'll be a reception for her work and also a show of amazing, beautiful and slightly scary photographs by our professor of photography, Brian Miller. Who's reimagined, in my mind, reimagined Adam in a really unusual way. And that's in the adjacent Strauss Gallery. So the two shows will open at once, so please come up afterwards and see them. I first saw Ambreen's art in person when master printer Peter Pettengill showed me some etchings that he was working on with her. I've since learned a great deal more about her and seen many examples of her work, which have only increased my appreciation of all that she does. I'm happy to say that the Hood Museum has acquired some of her prints, so that even after she leaves campus, you'll be able to have the same experience by going to the Hood and seeing her prints in person. Ambreen Butt was born in Lahore, is that how you pronounce it, Lahore? Lahore, Pakistan in 1969, and now has her home and studio in Boston. In 1993, she got her Bachelor of Fine Arts at the National College of Arts in Lahore, where she mastered the ancient art of traditional Indian miniature painting. And then, for a complete and confusing change of milieu, she moved to the United States to complete her MFA at Mass College of Art in Boston. She's currently represented by Carol & Sons Gallery in Boston and the Anna Kustera Gallery in New York City. Her drawings, paintings, prints, and installations, and forgive me if I left some other medium out, have been shown in solo and group shows all up and down the East Coast, dipping down into the South, and gracing various sites across this country en route to Los Angeles and Pasadena. She also shows her work around the world in Canada, Berlin, Islamabad, and Pakistan, for example. She's received prizes from the Joan Mitchell Foundation, the Canada Council for the Arts, and the Institute for Contemporary Art in Boston. And in 2006, she won the Maud Morgan Prize, which is given by the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston to a woman artist living in Massachusetts. I'm sorry to say that we're not the first place she's been artist in residence. She's been welcomed in that capacity at the Central Michigan State University, the McCall Center for the Visual Arts in Charlotte, North Carolina, the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. Her work has been reviewed extensively and enthusiastically in many publications, at least twice in the New York Times, and also in Art News, Art New England, and many others, and many, many times in the Boston Globe. We're all faced with the questions of who on earth am I and where did I come from? Where do I live? What do I think and what do I care about? And how can all that be embodied in my art? Ambreen Butt resolves what might seem like dramatic contradictions in her life by harnessing the energy of these differences into compelling visual ideas. She thrusts contemporary Americanized figures into the ancient but remodeled stage of Indian miniature painting, quietly introduces translucent layers of imagery, stitching, gold leaf, and collage, rubs two distinct cultures up against each other for fun and friction, She further explores her pictorial dramas of all sorts in remarkably vivid prints, and also pulls her work off the page and into space, as you'll see in the installation upstairs. She's masterful in technique, inventive and witty in spirit, profound in her imagery, and absolutely delightful in person. We're thrilled to have her and her family among us for a while. I hope you'll give her a warm welcome today and throughout the term. Ambreen Butt.
That was a really lovely artist statement. I think I can talk about food now. Let me know if the colors go wrong. I'm still up for talking about food. I think we spent a lot of energy till midnight last night, putting a show up for you guys. So, yeah, who cares? Okay, I'll talk anyway. So I guess I'm just going to go back, like 17, 18 years back. So I guess standing here, looking back at these two studies, which were done in early 1990s. Okay. So, better, thank you. So I see them in a place where making art was a result of seduction. And when I look back at my own history of making art, I find myself seduced by a figure. The earlier two studies, and these were, and this one, they are actually a reminder of my own idiosyncrasies of about what I liked seeing and what I liked painting from very early on, as during my training as an artist. This is a study of Shirin and Farhad, a Persian folklore, where Shirin is just taking a bath and come out and combing her hair, and Farhad is passing by, and it's like a Romeo and Juliet of Persia, and he sees her and falls in love with her. So obviously there's a tremendous sense of vanity in them. I was like, 20 years old when I was studying these techniques, and I'm not seeing these paintings as venue for any kind of intellectual underpinning, or the figures in them as women, but rather as beautiful objects whose function is to seduce the viewer and make them fall in love with them. So they are really functional as long as you look at them. So making art and looking at them kind of becomes a very sultry experience, at that stage. Then, after years, kind of 2 years of intense learning of all master's technique, you're able to explore, do whatever you want to do, but you still have to stay within the traditional format. So these are the two pieces from my thesis exhibition from my undergraduate. And I guess when I, look back at this age of innocence, I think in making art, trusting your own instincts kind of leads you to a better conscious making decisions eventually. So when the time came to test the intellect beyond the seduction, I kind of responded to a very mundane activity of reading the gossip columns in the magazines of women's sections, where there are also stories about different women, and every girl or every woman in Pakistan is supposed to read them, so they know if bad things happen to women out there in the world if they try to break the rules that are set up by the society. So, and they're kind of very scary stories and very fascinating at the same time. So I picked a story where one of the she was exploited by a feudal lord, and my intention was not to kind of use my art as a banner to basically, protest against the male chauvinism in Pakistan, because the story kind of eventually revealed many layers of domesticated politics of male dominance. But I think my intention was to bring a female voice into this genre of miniature painting, where it had never been practiced before. The female has always been represented by the male artist, through the male gaze, and she always had a certain kind of a very passive and quiet role. So I replaced the kind of very beautifully and elegantly painted Naika with these very sperm-like little figures which had agony on their faces. So let me just move on to the other one. Oops. Right. So by this painting, I graduated, I came to the US to do my master's. I think making art almost became a wholesome experience for me. It was a platform that served the self-satisfaction and catharsis. My interest was beyond the figure. I was interested in exploring the pictorial space and the relationship of the space with the figure, and most importantly, the questions arising from that juxtaposition, the questions about the woman's identity, the narrative, the self, and the viewer. So this is the detail. The questioning revealed the self-satisfaction and catharsis is not just enough. It's never enough in making art, realize. So once your physical space, shifts around you, the social and political milieu, the landscape, the color of the faces is different around you, your vocabulary alters in order for you to be recognized within a new context. So, which, by the way, does not mean a compromise. I think I kind of liberated myself from anything that defined me as an artist. I kind of tried, I eliminated the figure. I just, kind of literally kind of came out and tried many different things. So, and I also, in the process, located a place, this transitional phase. I think it was a very exciting place. A lot of exciting conflicts happen, and I learned a lot being in that place in between, where you cannot leave your past behind and you cannot embrace the future, your present at the same time, but you're right in the middle. So this piece was done in 1996, and there's a reference to an open page of a book, and which was it was created by ripping some old writings, some old journals, and they were ripped and they were pasted on top of the writings. So it's sort of like you're there and you're not. You're kind of transforming one reality into a completely new one. So I think migration and a transition, it's a place of tremendous uncertainty. There's a sense of disorientation, disturbance of direction, complexity of conflict and identity. It's all a product of this, one place. And yet it is a place of tremendous excitement and serendipity. So keeping art as an everyday kind of ritual or activity, it's a very calming effect, if you ever experience that phase in your life. So what I did here, what you see here, it's a detail of a wood carving. I had this piece of 3 feet long wood that I kind of carved every day. I basically wrote my journal on a piece of wood. It was just describing, the state of mind. And by the end of the semester, I had like this whole diary kind of hanging up on the wall, like a big, giant journal diary hanging up in the wall. With, here it is displayed in sort of an installation format. And the notion of two-dimensional space, in my painting is seen kind of literally in a 3D, where the lines and the text kind of actually become part of the real space. So I don't remember what I was looking at those times. I was here. I was a grad student. I was new, and I looked at a lot of Western contemporary artists. I may have gotten influenced by somebody. So if you see Mona Hatoum somewhere, I would not be surprised. But this is part of the installation. There was this low relief, which was of a female silhouette done with paper mache and kind of buried on a bed of green floor. So it was about growth and death, not in a literal sense, but in more sort of symbolic way, that you're kind of your old personality dying and the new coming out. It's all happening at the same time. And this is part of the installation. There's a lot of writing on the floor. So I'm always interested in drawing. I'm always interested in mark making. I can draw anywhere. I can take a thread. I can draw on paper. I can, pick up something. I can draw on wall. I just, enjoy the ritual of making, or using my hands. There were a lot of actually questions at the time about, kind of who's this art for? Is this, because is this for us Westerners? What are you trying to say? Because the elements that I'd used in the work, they do come from, like I had a really intense training for many years, and it's hard to, get rid of that, completely start something new. So in order to kind of bridge the gap, make something that would be understood beyond any kind of cultural barrier, it took me a while. So I tried several different, I did installation, I made sculptures, I made prints, I made paintings. So all that experience, kind of came together, and I came back to painting. I literally stopped making painting for a while, came back to painting. I changed my surface. I used to make paintings on paper. And so this is wood, 2 feet by 2 feet, and at that time it was the largest painting that I'd ever done. And there were like several fine layers of gesso and text buried in the on the surface. It's called "Why Do You Stay in Prison When the Door Is So Wide Open?" And the figure is seen, kind of surrounded by this foliage, which is kind of a metaphor for growth and shelter at the same time. And the title, by the way, is taken from 13th century Sufi poet Jalaluddin Rumi. And I kind of felt at the stage where, the work was speaking beyond, okay, it's not just miniature, it's not just East, it's not Pakistan, it's a painting, which, so, and that's another detail. So you can see some layers buried underneath the very fine kind of gesso, and then some text on top of it. So 2 feet by 2 feet. I worked on the surface. There was a lot of freedom to work on. I could literally abuse the surface, and nothing would happen to it. It's wood. Then I came back to paper, and then I realized how materials also dictate us. Our decision making. And I wanted to do something that was kind of very parallel to the ancient techniques that I had learned, the miniature painting, where you make your own paper, you make your own pigments and your brushes. And I wanted to create something, from today's time, from inside out. I started, went back to the figure came back. I started, I eliminated the old look of the figure, started modeling myself, started stylizing from the drawings that I would do of myself and place her in the work. And then, I wanted her to look like a woman who belonged to today's time. It's not somebody ancient or old or Eastern. It's a person. And then, I also wanted to update the technique. So I found a very contemporary material. It's a PET film. It's called Mylar. It's plastic. It's so much, today's stuff. This was back in 1999 when I, when we make our own paper, it's called Bustly. It's built in on several different layers of very fine cotton and silk. So you, glue the layers together, and then once you have a stable surface, you burnish it and then you paint on it. I used Mylar. It was interested in the history of the making of painting or drawing, something that you can see through, which you cannot achieve on a traditional miniature format. There's a lot of time that's spent on it, but you don't know what has gone underneath. So I would work on each layer, and instead of gluing it together, I'd stitch it. So thread became another element in the work. This is a series. It's called Bed of My Own Making, and these works focus on a ritual performance enacted by the female figure, and as I said, she's made a comeback. Unlike the mythical or divine woman from the older paintings, she appears quite realistic here. All right. So, and this one, it's an untitled from the series Bed of My Own Making. Her long hair that loops into a fishing pole, and the fish are metaphor for her being in charge of her own life, for better or for worse. I only picked 2 of the same series. This was the last one. And I tried talking to, different people. When I talk to men, how they see it. Does the work speak? Is it still like the miniature work, or is it? So, and the act that the female's performing. How do you take it? So pretty much got the same answer. So I just thought the work was. I'll leave it up to you. We'll just play a guessing game. What do you think she's doing right here? Instead of telling you what she's doing. We can talk about it after the lecture. Or come to my studio. The work, because up till that stage was kind of very personal, there was a lot of personal struggle, but when it was like that, when everybody else started relating with it, I just, the personal became political. So, and that has been, with the work since then. Anything that I do, it has some sort of a connection with the outside world. It, arises from some sort of social issue. It addresses a wider kind of audience. Sorry, I keep missing the cursor, right? Okay, so yeah, that's another one from pretty much the same series. I spent a month at Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's a really beautiful museum, and as an artist in residence. So I was able to go actually into the museum when there was nobody around at night, just walk around, spend time with the collection. So I photographed. Yes, it was a lot of, it was very beautiful. So I collected a lot of references. I photographed the museum space, the inside and outside those spaces. And I used those as one of the layers in the work. So the drawing is built on one of the view of the windows. And it's kind of, the whole imagery is integrated with the photograph that I got from the museum there. And this is it's also about kind of taking control, and yet you're not completely free at the same time. But all right, so this following series, it's called "I Must Utter What Comes to My Lips." The verse has been taken from Sufi poet Jalaluddin Rumi, 13th century Sufi poet, from his poem. Actually, I should read a few of his words because it was, kind of really inspired this whole thing. I must utter what comes to my lips. Speaking the truth creates chaos. Telling a lie saves one scarce. I'm afraid of both these. Afraid I am both here and there. I must utter what comes to my lips. This series is a response to the events of September 11th and their effect on an individual life. This was installed at the Worcester Art Museum in Worcester, Massachusetts. This is an installation shot. Can't get to it. Okay. So I went back and I kind of executed the work in the traditional format because I wanted them to look more, more illustrative, which is one of the qualities of traditional miniatures because they were made as part of the manuscripts initially. So because I think they're very emotionally charged, and that was what was more important at that time, than exploring with techniques or with materials. So here okay. So the figure here becomes sort of, it's not a female, anymore. It's a venue. The figure is a venue for a viewer to enter into the landscape of the painting, and which is sort of a metaphor for a place of defense and survival and escape. She appears in many different roles. A victim when she's dragged and lifted up by a group of birds, an oppressor when she targets the innocents with the gun. So this was, a clash of different versions of fanaticism resulting in collateral damage. So there was a lot of kind of jargon. There was a lot of, there was coming out through the media news, which I was able to understand, trying to understand, what it means, and I was processing everything through my art, so the word. I still don't understand to this day what does collateral damage means. So I kind of made this painting, and I think that kind of shows you pretty much everything. If you're not with us, you're with the terrorists. So it's kind of just responding to the kind of choice that you're getting. So, this country has been an icon of freedom and a place of opportunities for the rest of the world. But after September 11th, the policies in the name of Homeland Security, in fact, shattered many dreams and violated many human rights. So this is about the Homeland Security. This was a response to war on terror. The colors of the sky and the ground are familiar flags, and they're blending with each other, and their collision is forming something new, which is a simur. It's like a phoenix, which is pulling kind of a tree trunk with the roots that are attached. They become kind of turned into hair of a female, which is very kind of has a very little presence. That's another installation shot of the space. So so I'm also kind of also wonder about these pieces were they're all it's about us, and it's about the silent majority. It's about us, like when like how kind of we respond to things, around us, respond to the world around us. Sometimes, we become very optimistic. Sometimes we are very pessimistic. Sometimes we contribute to violence by closing our eyes. Sometimes, you kind of just you're tired and you raise your voice like enough. So this was, these basically many faces of society, these 4 pieces. And they were all done in multiples, like, they're a group of 3, a group of 2, kind of very interested in narrative. I want the viewer to walk into, because since, I did them in a very traditional, with a traditional technique, and they're not done in the book format, but I wanted the viewer to read the narrative and experience the, sort of like them as if they're reading a book. So I painted the walls, so each wall becomes a page, and then, there are 2 or 3 of them installed in there, so the narrative moved from one wall to the other. You wonder what this installation is all about, what the painting is all about, and you will see more out of the talk at the gallery. So you see here, she's kind of optimistic, and the other one, she becomes part of the whole system by contributing to it. I was reading, I was listening to music while I was painting this, a poetry by Bulleh Shah, and sung by a very famous singer from Pakistan. And she was talking about this. Why do you go out in the world to fight the evil? Have you ever looked into your own self? Have you ever fought with your own conscience? And it just kind of really, I thought, this is exactly what I was thinking when I was making the one on the right, where she's seen, trapped the simurgh, or a phoenix, in a cage of her own hair, and there is a kind of missile blasting up in the sky. And the second one, the sky becomes all dark. She's tired, but she's still trying to say, stop, stop. This is a triptych, which was done right after that series, it's still from the same series, but I deliberately wanted to make them look more pretty. It's the middle piece. It started with the middle piece, actually, with an older painting of one of the Mughal emperor, kind of with a bow and arrow and killing a devil's head, and so I kind of replaced the female figure. I got really interested in, kind of redefining, the identity of the woman or the female in this genre, where, as I said, she's never been shown in an active role in miniature painting. So here she takes charge, and so the narrative is read from left to right, and there is a conscious effort to make them more beautiful, more seductive. I'm very much into seduction. I love things that are seductive, but I also, at the same time, things that have more meanings. So this is basically about trust, deception, and betrayal. Okay, that's a different series. This is, it's an installation shot of the series called What is Past or Passing or To Come. So these works can be seen in the context of gender power struggle. The female figure has much more resemblance to the Kangra style Naika, like one of the very passive, beautiful females in the Mughal paintings. So here you'll see she's seen in engaged in resistance to the vulnerability that comes along in power politics. So sort of very much inspired by the earlier females, of the old traditional females standing in the balcony. But here she's kind of seducing a little lion. But the domination question is still unresolved here. you can't really tell who's controlling who. And these are all done on multiple layers of mylar, and each layer has been worked upon, and then they're stitched together. The same series is a different view. So here she's seen, resistance to the vulnerability. Each layer, it's got tons of work. I mean, this painting is built with small dots, and the colors that you see at the surface, they're actually built by putting several layers of these dots of different colors underneath layers. And of course, power struggle never ends cleanly. There's always a mess at the end. This was the last of the 3. Another shot. These were done in 2003, by the way. Right. So these are just pen, watercolors and brush. It was a diptych, and in this one, you see a woman kind of in more fetal position, and here it's sort of more emancipated. So, few of you don't know what Naika means when I was using this word. It's actually, she was a female heroine in older miniatures, and she was actually imagined and created by the male artist of Indian subcontinent centuries ago. She was a man's notion of a woman, very quiet, passive, and not challenging. And thus we don't see her, female version of those. Sort of like, there have been stories. The color changed here. Looks very red. Right. Anyway, there have been a lot of stories visually narrated on the adventures of Hamza, or Amir Hamza, and Rustam or Sahrab, but there's never been any female, who's been shown fighting the devils or, doing anything actually other than just seducing the viewer. So, so I did a series called "I Need a Hero." It's sort of, redefining her, kind of, making her come back. There's a need of a female heroine in that tradition. So, but it was inspired by an actual person, a woman named Mukhtara Mai. This woman, a few years ago, this woman from one of the villages from Pakistan, she was gang raped, and as part of her punishment, we have a, as part of her actually brother, punishment for her brother's 11-year-old brother's crime, and it was a local council who sat down and, women is, in some parts, of Pakistan or other parts in the world to consider, like, the honor of the family. So if somebody is dishonored a family, they will make it even by dishonoring the family by kind of either, raping the woman, or she's always been used in war. The woman has been used in war to as a tool to dishonor. So she was. This was her punishment, but she usually what happens is that the girls go commit suicide, things like that. But she decided to move on and take charge, control, and put her life, at risk. And then she goes on and files a report, and she goes after her rapists, and she gets them. All the right groups, go after her. There's just like one local a reporter puts her story out, and then kind of within days, the whole story's out in the world, and she's got a lot of support. Anyway, that was my whole intention, is not to kind of repeat her story or kind of illustrate her, but she is the inspiration because she's the woman. We need those kind of heroes in that. She's never been presented. This is the woman. This is the real woman. She needs to be part of this. So she is my hero, and I bring a heroine in the tradition of miniature painting. So, see if I can find my cursor. Okay, so here it's a diptych. This is part of the series, I Need a Hero. The demons and the dragons symbolize the inner fears and the corrupt system. She's seen suppressed by the demons and attacked by the hungry dogs around her. So I kind of put her in that role. She's like sweatpants and a t-shirt with a sword in her hand. She's she's gonna fight like Amir Hamza's done, like in the older. So they are done in a traditional format on a Wesley, and with traditional techniques. So she's herself is her savior here. You see that. Her strength is everlasting. She appears from the mouth of a dragon with a sword in her hand. And on the right, her torn shirt is used in strangling the dogs that attack her. On a different end, she's still engaged in fighting the demons whose head she stands on. So it's a lot of interconnectedness also, like, in creating the narrative here. So this was a triptych, and the narrative reads from right to left. And this one, the group of other women serving as cheerleaders in support of the one who is trapped above. And as it moves to the center, she's seen fearlessly standing on the dragon she was trapped by, and another part of her with her head sticking out, curiously trying to recognize the source of the trap. And then she gets it on the tip of her sword. So here's a feminist dilemma too. The consequences of this sort of war and emancipation, her life is not her own, anymore. She will always have to bear this burden of responsibility on her shoulders. There is a whole world that looks up at her in inspiration. So this basically kind of respond to Mukhtara May became, she was on the cover. She was the Woman of the Year of a title given by the Vogue magazine, or she just became an international hero. So, but then I read her memoir. That how she spends her days is like she's never alone. She always has these women coming from every part of the world who need help, and they sleep in her room. She is never alone. She's the icon of like. Now, she's the responsibility of many other women in the world, and she speaks for them. So, so in order to achieve something, you have to give. So that was the feminist dilemma in the work. Anyways, much brighter. This is a different series done 2007, Cirque du Monde. It's a series of drawings and 3D installation, which is about contemplating the reality and viewing it through different lenses. I use black and white as a metaphor to present truth as a sort of the metaphor that has a quality of a chameleonic element. I'm also referring to the truth that is bombarded on us through the media, and how the same truth becomes a different reality. This one's called decapitation. By the way, if you look at the image and kind of lock your eyes on it for more than 30 seconds, it's going to blur. You will not be able to recognize what it is. It's going to blur with it. And that's what I meant by how reality shifts and the same truth becomes another truth. Did you see it? Right, I'm going to move. This is called decapitation. So in this series, I'm also responding to the war on Iraq, and how it has been presented and justified to us by the media or the politician. So this particular one, I call it a fatal love. And this is a piece that was originally done for my show in 2007. You'll see it at the gallery. It's installed here. I didn't really have to change my palette of materials to make this. I just changed the way the materials interact with each other. To use the same thread, same mylar. There's always a ritual happening in my studio. I take a piece of paper, I draw it, then it stays there, and take another piece of paper, draw it, and then I turn it into something. So I started drawing eyes. I started folding the paper, I turned it into a box. Then I took a thread, instead of stitching, I kind of put it up on the ceiling and brought it down the wall. So, and then this was formed. This is a detailed view of this. So this really is a piece that responds to its space. The installation of this piece is different from this because these were installed differently. So it's about viewing and changing the reality of the space inside the cube, basically. It's about our limitations, our constraints on how we see things. This was made about my art, about the world, the real world outside of the studio and the gallery space. This is one of my studio walls, and I've got a lot of stuff. My references come from everywhere. I like having, making art kind of as a wholesome experience. I don't want to separate my studio from the rest of the, my life. It's all integrated. What happens in the life, it kind of, it shows up and comes in another form in the studio. So I particularly show you this wall because you see a lot of these faces in my work. You will see a lot of these images and these narratives in this new series, which you will be seeing at the gallery as well. The series is called Dirty Pretty. And that came about after making a trip back to Pakistan after 12 years. There's been a tremendous rise in the violence in the country the past few years. The landscape, the environment has changed a lot since the time I've moved here almost 17 years ago. So I came back, whatever I'd witnessed, I came back with that and processed it all in the studio. I kept following the stories, the things that are happening there, and kind of keep putting things up on the wall. This is another wall. So the Dirty Pretty series, it just encompasses several different practices. There's drawing, there is painting, there's collage, there's stitching, etc., etc., gold leafing, gilding, which you all call. So by layering and juxtaposing different elements that have their own pre-existing myths and interpretations, I try to redefine them and give them new meanings and new identities. The references for this work come from a very rich imagery from the mass media, as well as archival resources. So I look at the old masters' works too, and they're juxtaposed. These images, they have their own myths, they have their own stories. They are taken out of their context. I put them together. They're layered, juxtaposed, and it's really all about making up the stories. And I want it to be really, really as pretty as it can be, because at a closer inspection you'll see there are these scenes of violence, and a lot of my work addresses the issues of war, powers, violence. So you name it, it's right there. Let me go to the detail. So yeah, and one of my main concern here, using this experimental approach, I carefully rendered the role of this traditionally old-fashioned genre of painting in a contemporary practice. The result is complex in its content and bears it's very sumptuously elaborate physical presence. So of course, this was a diptych, sort of like an open page. This is the left panel. When the painting is closer to the right, that means it's the left page. So there's a reference to the open page of a book. There is a narrative that I've taken from an older painting of one of the Mughal emperor hunting somewhere in Afghanistan, and he saw, it was a beautiful painting of it was a hunting scene, and at a closer inspection I noticed that the deers or the gazelles, they were very beautifully painted and close, and they're all crying, they're startled, and because they're being hunted. So I picked that, and I heard that that Akbar, the emperor, he saw so much bloodshed in that field that he became a very peaceful person after this. He created his own religion. It was called the Religion of the Peace, and he encouraged people from different faith in his court, and he even married a woman of a different faith after that. So I guess I was kind of looking at it in today's context, how much violence there is around and how much more violence there is going to be before there's going to be peace. So I juxtapose all these other stories on top of it, of Akbar's hunting. The piece is called The Great Hunt, and these, I'll show you the details. These drawings, this blue outlines, these are all stitched. So using thread as a line, to make marks. They're layered, there's more stories underneath. It's not about, I collect these stuff and put them together, but at the same time, I don't want them to be completely away from their origins. So they do stand on their own, these paintings, with their own stories. I want as many stories as one can take out of these. But at the same time, I don't want them to be totally removed from their reality too. So there was a scene of women, were goaded into this police van, because while they were protesting, and those are also stitched. You will see them at the gallery. This is the Great Hunt. That was Great Hunt 2. This is the Great Hunt 1. So I'm almost done. I think this is actually one of the, you can see this is taken from my camera, not from John Horner's camera. In my studio, this is one of the underlayers, how the work, you can see how many layers it goes through, and you can also see the picture on the wall behind it. There's a series of prints that I did at Wingate Studio. This work is from 2008. The suite of prints is called Daughter of the East. This particular one is called Ladybugs. So here, if you notice, there was an image of these women with the bamboo sticks in their hands, and they're all covered in black burqa when I was showing you a shot of those images on my studio wall. The image is taken from there. These are very young girls, like they're girls of a very tender age, like 16, 17, 18 years old, but you cannot identify them who they are because they're all covered. So their identity is all, basically there's no identity. And these girls were pretty, there was an incident a few years ago in Islamabad. There was a mosque called the Red Mosque. These girls were students there, and somehow, they turned into some sort of a militant activity, and there was a big a military siege on that mosque, and a lot of these girls ended up dying because thought they were fighting for the right, and they fought with the and they that's the story behind. But that's not the point. It's just, it's about, what struck me about this image itself was that, them holding onto the bamboo. So I'm actually making a sculpture at the moment of this with the bamboo, hand holding a bamboo. So I went and got the bamboo stick and I, held it. And it just gives you a tremendous sense of empowerment. Whoever held it, oh, it feels good. So, just imagine, this, it's all about, this, she's looking like a goddess of the wrath, like Kali. And yet, so it's sort of like this false sense of empowerment by just holding a bamboo stick. It's just a bamboo stick. So I just juxtapose the image with the image of ladybugs. I just, while I was working on it, I opened a door. There's a season when there are a lot of ladybugs, and it's very pretty when you see one. They're very delicate. It's a symbol of good luck in the Western culture. But when you see so many of them, it's kind of very scary. It's very... So this piece was about delicacy and delicacy and infestation, with this juxtaposition of these delicate ladybugs and then the delicate age of these girls, and then how they're and these are all etchings, by the way. And so when I always work on multiple pieces, I really didn't plan any story before making it. It's just kind of stories happening on its own. Here you see her. I wanted to pull 2 prints out of, they're like done on 6 or 7 multiple plates. And I wanted to get a darker and a lighter version of it. So we were able to pull a dark version where she's, I drew or painted little dots on each plate, so the dots were printed on top of each other. So wherever the color goes, it becomes darker, and so the areas that are covered with the wax, it becomes white. So I just wanted it to look like sort of like little light bugs coming out of her feet, where she's looking at her feet. She's no feet to walk, but this is the light in the dark, and that's the only reality she's seeing. This was the last one, where kind of I unveil her. It's sort of like this gesture of kind of very vulnerable and tired woman with that bamboo stick, which is pecked by a woodpecker, which is like at the end, it's just a bamboo stick. In the background, there's, there's this police helmet and turbans juxtaposed on each other, a militant turban juxtaposed on each other. So almost looking like, this sort of the a firecracker or bomb blasting. So I did another project while I was working on that project, another print project at Massachusetts College of Art. These are silkscreen, lithograph, and etching and chincolé, where I've just pulled out an image of a woman kind of been beaten up by the police guard, and I just kind of used the helmet as this and juxtapose it with the fish, while they were goaded into the truck. They almost very tight spaces. They could, I don't know how they were able to breathe in there. So I just juxtaposed the image with the image of the fish in the net. Here I just wanted the figure to completely disappear. It's just one figure. This whole print is made with different parts of the body. I just pull the hair and turn it into something. I like making patterns. I just take elements and then start drawing and redrawing and repeating and then kind of I like witnessing when one little things transform itself into something completely different and new, but it also retains its own identity in a smaller piece. So then I took an 18 months break from studio and I got back to it. So with a new approach, this is a new series which I plan on continuing while I'm here. The I've already titled the series. It's called I Will Be Called Drawing. So I've begun to reappreciate the mundane rituals and how the rituals contribute in making big ideas happen. So I just pick up a paint marker and started writing. It's a song sung by the drawing about its making, and the words don't matter at all, only music does. So here's a detail. I Will Be Called Drawing. And there's one more. It's called I Am All What Is Left of Me. It's a drawing by cutting up words of others that described my art. It's not only about taking back the ownership of your own art, but it's also about continuing a dialogue that starts at the studio and then carries on outside and then back at the studio. I would actually love to end this by quoting a friend who made a comment on this picture on Facebook. So, and I loved it. So I'm going to read it. The most difficult thing to understand is we are not this and only that. Only this and not that, and its opposite. Always reconfigured and not figured out. So enjoy process. Open for questions.
I think we have a few minutes for questions.
I try to make sure that I don't leave any room for questioning.
Are you ready?
Mm-hmm. Yes. In the very early ones, yeah.
Yeah. Was there a specific reason you wrote up that specific journal? Or something
So, I mean, my work's always been, it's very emotionally charged, and it was about kind of, as I said, it's, continuing a dialogue. There's this is your reality. I used to write a lot, and I wrote a lot before, and then, after a few years, then you say, oh, this is not really me. Did I do this? And so, but you're there and you're not. So you accept yourself and you reject yourself at the same time. So it was about rejecting and accepting, and I ripped it. And of course, I could not discard it. It was, so I had to save it in another form. So I transformed it from the old self to the new self. So before I could read it, now I could not read it, but I could see it. So that's. But also, like in the new one, I'm kind of going back. I'm going to the studio now without any expectation. I'm really enjoying mundane rituals and then see where it goes. I mean, the ripping. These rituals are becoming very rare now. We don't do that anymore. It tells you, it's so much about rejection, and it's also about taking control. We read most of the papers, on the computers. We don't read paper anymore. The books are becoming rare. So, I get more and more getting interested in this kind of stuff, more laborious stuff. I mean, we spent hours yesterday doing little things, at the gallery. But that's more important for me than the final product. And I know it always transforms itself into something that you can look at eventually. But so I don't go in the studio with the ideas anymore. I come back after 18 months to the studio, and I just go there with the inspiration, but not with the idea. So, totally different approach. We have to keep rediscovering ourselves as an artist. So, any more?
one more, sorry. This is just elaborating a little bit upon that studio experience, but when you have a break from the studio, which you have for many reasons, can you talk a little bit about how it is that Rachel is going back and working, or what is it with the break? Because I know oftentimes that's the fear of many artists of stopping work and then going back to work.
Yeah.
And
So-
did you deal with that?
So you basically, I was told by, I asked Abe Morel, the very well-known photographer, I'm sure you know it, what do you do? Like, and you've got a family. He said, just don't have any expectations of yourself. So you have to bring your expectations down to zero and then walk in the studio and, leave the ideas behind. Don't take any ideas there. Just take the inspirations, just something. And I think with no expectations. And that's it. I mean, I started these last two drawings. I didn't know where it's going to go, and idea just jumped in when I was working on it. I'm all what is left of me. This is what I just ripped up all the writings, and that's all was left there. And so.
And then just one other
Sure.
question. Is after that, you have the studio experience and the making of the work, and then you put the work out into the world, which you are doing right now this evening for us.
Yeah.
How is that transition from the making of the work to the exhibiting of the work?
So then, you're in control. You can do whatever. You're the master in the studio. Then you really have to let go. Outside of the door, once the work leaves the studio door, it's not yours anymore. No matter what you thought before you made it, it just does not apply anymore because you have only two eyes. There'll be 100 eyes outside, and you've only one way of looking at it. There'll be 100 ways of looking at it. So, again, expectations. There was a time before I wanted the work to kind of control it. This is the way I wanted it, but I still could not do it. There's a lot. I'm still known as a Pakistani-born miniature artist. I've done this long ago. I'm doing something else, but I still have those labels. So you just really have to let go. You cannot control everything outside. I think the good thing is that you learn. That's why I started this, because this is a continuation of the dialogue that happens in the studio. Then it goes out, and then you bring it back. I transform it, make it like into a more productive experience than. So.
Well, if that's all, please join us right after this in the gallery for a reception for her work and Brian Miller's show. We'll see you there.